Welcome to the latest edition in real estate, Real Talk, where we put the real in real estate. Look, I've already had my gently caffeinated beverage, and obviously it's not enough for the evening, but I am welcomed here by Justin Landon, our amazing CEO. And step aside, Justin, though, we've got Kathy Faulkner online with us tonight, all right? Who is the acclaimed, esteemed, beloved MetroTex Director of MLS. Kathy, thank you for joining us this evening.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's been a minute, right, since we've done one of these together.
It has, definitely.
We always get an interesting crowd, Kathy. So here's going for another great rendition. So tonight, though, we've got some fun changes to talk about. We've already been going over some of the settlement rules changes, forms changes, different things that have been teeing up, but we finally kind of have D-Day coming right around the corner. So maybe kick us off with what that means in your world as far as what's to come July 29th.
So come next Monday is the big day where all of the compensation fields are going to be removed from the MLS. And so that means when you log into a listing, you are not going to see anything that has any information related to an offer of compensation. So we're going to have to help some of our members get through that. And maybe there might be a few that haven't heard about the lawsuit or the settlement. So I have a feeling our phones are going to be ringing in the MLS department just a little bit.
Justin, this will be your first forte. Well, you know what? Look, it's been an acceleration of things since you joined us in March. But obviously the official change of coming through with the offer of compensation, the field being removed out of MLS is kind of a big day. So, what have we been preparing behind the scenes as MetroTex to make sure that we can still be there to serve our members and doing such within our member services department and MLS and kind of an all hands on deck approach?
Yeah, I think the first thing that Kathy kind of touched on, I think is really important for all of us to remember, both within the brokerage community, the association, checking on our friends and neighbors. As much as we have sort of been living and breathing these changes for a period of time, certainly Kathy and I, you, Ashley, like we've been thinking about this stuff for 3 to 5 years. It's been building to this moment. I was at a brokerage a couple weeks ago and somebody raised their hand and they said, "What lawsuit are you talking about?" And, the room was sort of confused. But what I realized was the agent was brand new. They'd only been out licensed for a few months. It was a perfectly natural question. And as you always like to bring up, Ashley, a large percentage of our members are new. They've only been members for a year or 2 or 3. They're new to the business. And so part of what we're preparing for is, although it's hard to imagine nobody has heard about this, we fully expect to have a significant percentage of our members that still were not fully aware of the change, despite the cadence of emails, the videos, the news reports, all the stuff we've been doing to raise awareness with our members through things like Real Talk and the classes we've been offering, the broker summit that we did. And so we're just making sure that everybody on our team, that the 54 staff professionals that come to work every day at MetroTex and our service center people, so the 61 staff professionals that work at MetroTex, all told, are all educated and prepared to assist our members through this period of change. Now, I'll acknowledge not all 61 have the level of expertise that Kathy has, so I'll also ask everybody to have some patience, trying to get to those of us that can really answer the more nuanced questions. But everybody's prepared to answer the questions that we think are most likely going to come through. And the other parts of this is us trying to figure out how to manage this from a compliance perspective, an enforcement perspective. Because at the end of the day, the NAR settlement has put these new rules in place. We're having to implement them. And we really have a responsibility to not just our board of directors, not just to our members, but also to the community to ensure that these settlement agreement terms are adhered to. So that we can all keep doing business, because if we don't enforce the rules, we're putting all of our livelihoods at risk by not complying with the settlement agreement. So we're going to be, aggressively ensuring that people are following the rules.
Well, and that's something else we're going to talk about. Oops, we've got a little bit of feedback there for a second. So, that's something that we need to talk about is the compliance piece, because as we've been teaching the updates, just the updated forms at MetroTex, I mean, that's been coming around, which is, well, how are we going to enforce certain things? And so there's two things that we're going to talk about, right? Is the offers of compensation being advertised within the MLS in any capacity. And then also the other part of the enforcement piece is the fact that per the settlement, there has to be some sort of buyer representation agreement of some sorts in place to be able to give access to tour those homes. So let's start off first with the compliance piece of offers of compensation within the MLS. So Kathy, kind of maybe talk about what that's going to look like. I know we don't have what those potential fines that will be enforced. We will probably by the end of the week, but surely that'll be advertised before Monday. But let's kind of talk about why and what that's going to look like for our members.
So it's going to be a combination of efforts. First, the first line of defense is going to be our listing data checker. It is going to be sharpened up to look for words that could lead to a violation of the settlement agreement with any offers of compensation in the MLS. And quite frankly, at this point, at first we're going to do warnings. We'll do that for about a month because we want to see, what is the flavor of these? Are people just uninformed, unaware? Let's get people educated. But after that, then it's deliberate. And the terms of the agreement require that MLSs enforce this. And so we have to make sure that we're doing, and that we can show that we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we are in compliance with the settlement, because that puts all of you at risk if we don't. And so we have to make a strong effort. So there's a lot of information and a lot of ways that this is going to be looked at, but the preliminary conversations are that the fines for deliberately violating this policy are going to be hefty. And so especially once we tell you, warn you, and especially people are playing games, with trying to sneak it in somehow.
They wouldn't do that, Kathy. What are you talking about?
Our members are all angels, every single one of them. All 27,000 of our members are angels. But on occasion, we have a little devil, and people are really stressed about this stuff. So they want to, it's new. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I navigate now? And, I have people running scenarios by me. Can we do this? Can we say that? Can we do that? No. Just don't put anything in the MLS that has to do with anything or hint towards an offer of compensation. It's not going to be allowed. And so, so just don't do it. And so, just say no. And, yeah.
And I think the important thing to add there, Kathy, is that you are welcome to advertise, a cooperating compensation if you like in other places that are exclusive to you and your brokerage or on your own social media. It just can't be in the MLS. Like, that is a hard line. It's like, I don't want to, show my dork card too heavy, but like, it's like Lord of the Rings, like thou shalt not pass. You cannot do it in the MLS. That is just a strict hard line that we're going to be policing heavily.
Well, and that's I think the biggest thing is to understand, like, we're not taking this on ourselves and saying, we're going to be that compliance arm. Like, that's part of what we have to do as the MLS, is to make sure that we are adhering to those. And so, look at that, Justin, you got a nod from Sherry Fearbogger saying precious. So apparently she liked your, you're not precious.
I thought she was talking about how great Kathy is.
No, she's talking about my reference to all of our members are angels. They're precious.
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. But that's what people need to understand. I mean, we have to, as the MLS, come and enforce this to make sure that is in compliance with the settlement agreement. And I know Shanae had asked, can we share with us what the range of the violation fines are going to be? Not until probably after Thursday. We are going to look at ratifying those at a special called MLS board meeting and really look at that. We've had a task force kind of deep diving and discussing this over the past several weeks. So that's something that we will have before Monday. So everybody is aware. I say before Monday. Best laid plans will be before Monday. All right, let's see what Britt Fair has to say. He said, I'm sure y'all will do great on the MLS side. Will be interesting to see the other side on the buyer reps. That was the other piece, Britt, which was that is another thing that we have a lot of misnomers, I think, that are circulating around there. So Justin or Kathy, do you want to kind of take that as far as the buyer representation agreement side as to what enforcement will look like, how that will potentially be approached?
Yeah, let me address sort of just the buyer rep. I want to be precise. A buyer compensation agreement before touring a property. And then I'll let Kathy talk on sort of the compliance side and what that may look like. I think it's important as we talk about this that we're making sure that we're using the correct terms. The settlement agreement requires that an agent and their client establish compensation before touring a property. That's the explicit language that's used in the settlement agreement. Texas Realtors has promulgated a form that provides some optionality around what kind of service is being offered in that buyer rep agreement, whether it's a limited service or full service, and it has a compensation attached to it. In addition to those forms, there's a brokerage is fully within their rights to adopt anywhere in the middle, right? Between, we're just going to show you this house and here's how much you're going to pay me, anywhere from zero to whatever, infinity, versus a full agency buyer representation agreement. And I just want to make it clear that as long as you're in compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement and you're in compliance with state law, you're welcome to use whatever buyer representation form you and your brokerage decide is in your best interest. It just needs to be signed and agreed to in advance of touring a property. Now,
and Justin, and what I just want to highlight that caveat really quickly of what Justin is saying. And if you've gone to any of our forms classes recently, you will probably hear the same thing. It is what you and your broker determine is an appropriate, buyer representation agreement. That absolutely is dictated within your brokerage, and we keep on referencing the Texas Realtors forms, which are there and available for usage. And obviously a wide variety of our population does use those. And therefore the updated forms are available through Texas Realtors on both the short form and the long form. But it's really important and imperative that we keep on driving it home that this is brokerage specific. And if your brokerage decides to develop their own form or their own standard operating procedure around what that form looks like, that is absolutely appropriate, and that's the way it goes.
And then Kathy, I don't know if you want to maybe touch on, just from a compliance perspective, what that might look like as we try to enforce this requirement of a buyer's agreement.
Well, the good news is I'm not going to ask you all to send me your collection of buyer agreements. Please don't. Yeah, we don't want them. But if we do get a complaint, we will ask you for it. And we do expect you to either say, no, I don't have one, or yes, I do, and here it is. And just you saying, yes, I have it isn't going to be good enough. We want to see the form. I'm not going to talk to you about how to fill the form out. That's not my position. Or what's contained in the document, not my role. I'm not an attorney. I just need to know, and I need to have proof that you had one, or have one. I don't. But again, someone's going to have to file a complaint, and we're not going to be proactively looking for those. I'm assuming there's going to be reasons people would file a complaint. Again, this is one of the warning period issues we want to see. Are we going to get complaints? What are their flavor? Why are because I'm going to want to know if somebody asks me, hey, I don't think so-and-so, I don't think Ashley had a buyer agreement when she took, Justin to see his property. Oh, okay. And I mean, I'm going to want to know why you are involved. Why would you be asking? Why do you need to know whether one existed? I'm going to have a lot of questions if you file a complaint. So, and I think we do need to be careful about collecting those forms, because again, we don't want to create any kind of impression that we want to see what you're putting in the compensation blank. It's none of our business. But I'm also going to be curious as to why you're filing the complaint and why you need to know.
Just like now, right? I mean, you'll get complaints or people questioning whether or not there's an active listing agreement in place.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
so this is the same mode of operation that we already had in place. It's just now the roles are reversed, and because there's an emphasis on having that some sort of agreement in place prior to touring, that might be ramped up initially, as Britt has inferred. But that's something, again, that ultimately we've also had conversations about whether or not there's one in place, and then from the listing agent or from the seller side, then they shouldn't have to offer a compensation or vice versa. Guys, that will all get fleshed out in the wash at the end, as far as getting to the closing table with a commission disbursement agreement and going to the closing disclosure and everything else. But so there's a lot of anxiety around up front of what we're going to do to enforce these things. And to your point, Kathy, I love that, you're going to ask clarifying questions as to why somebody's complaining in the first place to dictate whether or not it's prudent to ask for proof of a representation agreement.
Yeah. And to be clear, if someone does file a complaint and we feel like it's justified, and we ask the question, do you have one? And they provide it. I'm not giving the person who filed the complaint that buyer agreement. They don't get to have it. Just like if someone filed a complaint about a listing agreement, even if it was the seller, I would probably not. I would just say, yes, we received it, and you did sign it. Something along those lines. But we would never share that buyer agreement with anybody else, and we would not share it with the complainant. We would just, we would just verify, yes, it exists, and that's the answer you're going to get from us. Yes, there was one.
Well, another great example would just be, somebody calling to complain about a status change, right? You have a certain period of time to make a status change. Those come in all the time, right? And so we reach out and it's like, hey, is there a contract on this property? And they say yes or no. And it's like, okay, well, then we need to verify that what you're saying is true. And so these are common conversations that our MLS team is having every day. And this will just be one more item that adds on to that. And it'll be a little bit of a different wrinkle, in large part because it's between a client and their customer, and no one else really is involved, like they are in the purchase agreement. And so it'll be sensitive and something we'll just have to work through. I do not anticipate to be flooded with these complaints because, again, I think there's a fairly limited circumstance where somebody would be aware that one wasn't signed. But if we do become aware that one hasn't been signed, we would obviously take that very seriously.
And so now we've got a couple of questions, some where we might be able to give definitive, some not. But Missy Trantham was asking, what about under transaction desk and offer instruction forms? That's really important to stress. Why is that not appropriate, Kathy?
Because the transaction desk is connected to the MLS. And so that is using a roundabout way to sneak in the offer of compensation. And again, that's going to be not tolerated. So no, transaction desk under the instructions for offer submission is not acceptable.
Wonderful.
And I want to add something to that, just to say, you're going to hear us at this point in this process. It's going to be a little bit of Dr. No around here, because we don't, 2 years from now, as this evolves and we understand the intent behind all the parties involved in the settlement agreement, and some of this has a chance to work through, 2 years from now, our answer to some of these may be different than they are today. But right now, we're at the beginning of a process that we are only, like you guys, only beginning to fully understand the implications of. And so right now, we're going to play it very safe, again, with the understanding that we need to ensure that the most vital tool that is used in real estate to transact business, which is the multiple listing service, can continue to operate for the benefit of the entire marketplace. And to do that, we need to adhere as close as possible and as strict as possible to the terms of the settlement agreement as we understand them. And then we'll see where we are in a year or 18 months from now as things evolve, because they surely will. In much the way that Michelle Moran's question higher up starts talking about the situation in Colorado that's taking place, because those things will start to provide context within each state.
And so let's address Michelle's question just on service, which is, the buyer agreement. Is the buyer agreement a state requirement or national? Colorado yesterday has had discussion that they cannot hold a buyer to sign one. And Justin, you let me know that was breaking news, and we've been conversing over that the last couple of days. So just very quickly kind of walk through as to why that's a piece of news.
Yeah, the first thing I'll note, and Parker, I don't know if you have, Parker's our man behind the curtain. I don't know if you have this handy, but if you do, it'd be great to share the real estate news QR code at some time during this so folks can, or put it in the chat where folks might be able to get their free subscription to realestatenews.com, which MetroTex is now making available to all of our members. It's about $100 $180 annual value subscription to what I think is the most independent and unbiased real estate news source in the marketplace. I read Real Estate News where they published an article about what was happening in Colorado. And what's happening in Colorado is their state licensing authority, looking at state law, felt that buyer representation agreements to be mandatory at the first tour of a property would not be appropriate under state law, nor did they determine that would be in the client's best interest per their state law. Again, we don't really know how that plays out with the settlement agreement, although the settlement agreement specifically says, unless state law says something different. So that's an interesting case where we'll just have to see how things evolve in Colorado as this develops. What's interesting is I think Colorado is also one of the very few states where the licensing authority actually makes a buyer representation agreement available. Very similar to how we have the residential 1-to-4 contract here in Texas. They have a buyer agreement that their licensing authority promulgates. So I think that's the hard part about reading headlines right now. And Kathy and I have had extensive conversations about this. You can't take what's happening in Colorado or California or Oregon or Florida and that you may be reading about in Lab Coat Agents or one of these other Facebook groups that puts news together. We can't assume that what is true there is also true here. And things are going to evolve here in Texas in a way that are slightly different than they evolve somewhere else. I think that's just important for us to remember.
So there's another one that Amy brought to us, which would it be appropriate to just say buyer brokers welcome in remarks, which actually has been a frequent question because it's not insinuating an offer of compensation. But what say you, Kathy, as you chuckle?
I love Amy. And I would ask, at what point would a buyer agent not be welcome?
Yeah.
If you're putting it on the MLS.
It's the insinuation that we're trying to advertise that there will be some sort of compensation being willing to be offered at that point.
And I think what I would reference is fair housing. Just an understanding of how asking what words are okay and what words aren't okay. For me to say, oh yeah, that's totally not a fair housing violation if you say it that way, but if you say it this way, it is. Generally the answer is, what was the intent? And if somebody read it, what would they think the intent was? Even if you used all the appropriate words, could you still be, potentially violating fair housing because that's how someone else interpreted it? I think the answer is potentially, and I would say the same is true here. If we're trying to find the right words to communicate something, then you should stop trying to communicate that thing in that place.
Well, and then they've actually, from the DOJ side and also the attorneys that have led the charge in some of these class actions, they've actually said workarounds and loopholes are being watched. And that doesn't mean that you don't still advocate for your seller by advertising appropriately what they want you to advertise through the approved channels of marketing, because that's the biggest thing here. It's not that they can't. They can advertise in many different ways. It just can't be something that is automatically connected or fed through the MLS. And I want to take a look at Brett's, because the three of us were actually talking about this earlier today. We're talking about broker bay or showing time instructions with the offer of compensation, because like on one side we're like, no, it's connected to the MLS, or they have a feed from the MLS, and on the other side we're like, well, but it really ultimately comes down to, I think what you were saying, Kathy, what's the thing that they keep on putting at your feet? Is it creating a database, or
right.
Kind of talk about that?
It becomes a platform where competitors are collecting information from one another about compensation, and that is what the lawsuit is trying to stop, is having a database that could be construed as a collection of competitors gathering information on compensation, and it's turning into something it shouldn't. And so that's what we don't want to have. And I do know conversations are going to be had with Showing Time in Broker Bay about this issue. I don't know where we're going to land on it yet. But we don't want that to become the other platform, which is also it's a violation of the settlement, to have a database where competitors have gotten together and are, putting, marketing their offers of compensation to one another. It's a violation of this settlement. And it's going to ruin it for everybody. To
me, it's anything that creates a marketplace for compensation, right? So, that could be a Facebook group, that could be a website, it could be a messaging function within an application. If that is creating a marketplace, it's risky. And if that area takes data from the MLS per the settlement agreement, we have an obligation to stop it. So if it gets a feed from the MLS. So I would say any marketplace that's created, whether that's a Facebook group, whether it's a website that has multiple brokerages involved, it's highly risky for antitrust violation, if not explicitly a violation. But certainly if the MLS is providing any data to it, it's something that we have an obligation under the settlement agreement to stop. Now, I think this is where the nuance gets really messy. And this is why I say for now, we're going to be very conservative because we don't know how things will evolve. The messaging function within some of these platforms is not dissimilar from sending somebody an email. And we acknowledge that sending an email between two people, telling them what the compensation is okay. So how is that different if that messaging function is within Broker Bay or Showing Time? But I think right now our perspective is going to be being as conservative to ensure that we can all continue to do business. That's not wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go on to the next question, I just have to give a shout out to my daughter, who loves to watch me while she's at her Shields and Culver's date with her dad while we're doing this. So hi, baby. Okay.
Go to Culver's?
You don't want to go to Shields either? Come on. Yeah. No. So, okay, let's go to Jackie Bainbridge. As an investor broker, I go and look at properties on my own and then send into after. How would that reply or that agreement look for me? Have them sign if a contract is written or when I send them the information? So that's kind of a quandary, right? Because there's a lot of times where I work with a lot of investors too. And so sometimes I'm going to go, preview a property and look at that, or I have in the past. To see if that's something that I think is worth sending to my investors to further pencil out. So what are the thoughts there? Because it's not a virtual tour, but it is still, it's a preview, essentially.
Yeah, I think Kathy may have a different view on this. I think from a compliance perspective, it would be a weird one for us because we wouldn't have a client necessarily to tie it to. So we might be hands off from saying, oh, you violated our rule and we're going to seek compliance. But I would say as a brokerage, you want to make sure that you're evaluating your risk associated with that with your legal counsel about, hey, I'm doing this activity. When do you think would be best for us as a business practice to ensure that we're in full compliance with our requirement as a realtor brokerage to be in compliance with the settlement agreement? I think from the MLS's perspective, we would have to try to, we don't necessarily know which client you were there on behalf of. You may have been there on behalf of 5 or 6 different investor potential clients. And so I think from a compliance perspective, it'd be tricky, but I do think there's potential risk there that you'd want to evaluate with your team and make a decision as a brokerage.
And Sherry just put, it's in-person showing or live virtual per NAR. And it's still a showing. And there are potential multiple clients that you're viewing that property on behalf of. So
in the NAR's Q&A, they define what working with a buyer means. And that could potentially fall into that category is, you're providing brokerage services at that point, and that might be the time that you would need to get a buyer agreement.
Okay.
But I would look at that. I would look at that Q&A and maybe call, and just and make sure you're clear on what that the definition of working with a buyer means.
Well, and Jackie, this may have been a question that was asked. You may have asked this question in one of our classes, because I remember having a discussion about something very similar to this with our team here. And it did occur to me that this may be an opportunity to explore for you and your particular situation, a different kind of buyer agreement that you enter into with your clients, in the same way that somebody might enter into an agreement with a builder, right? Sort of like a blanket agreement that covers a period of time, because it is unique where you're going to be out with these previewing for these investors broadly. So I think it's an interesting opportunity for you to explore as a brokerage with your own legal counsel.
I think it's a great answer. So we did have a question that unfortunately we plucked, but I think it's a good one, just because we want to make sure that we're not talking about actual percentages or numbers or anything else, as I'm sure, we have belabored that lovely antitrust statement so much when we're doing these things. But we had a question that somebody said, I had a listing agent tell me yesterday that they were not sure if a seller would contribute anything to the buyer until they reviewed the offer. How do we know that these agents aren't working out some sort of listing compensation with their clients and offering buyer's agents nothing? Is this not something outlined in the listing agreement anymore? So, Jesse, what I would say is here's an opportunity for us to talk about something that is kind of at the big 30,000 foot view, which is unilateral offers of compensation versus those are gone. And we discussed that earlier today, that I think that's going to be the biggest mindset shift, that it is not required to be predetermined within the listing agreement, as the listing, or at least the listing agreement that Texas Realtors has updated that you might be using. We are removing that unilateral offer of compensation out of the MLS, which now means that, super everything is negotiable, as it has always been. But, I think that's a lot of the anxiety that's going around realtors is somebody's going to try to take, a piece of my pie away, and they're doing this, but that's kind of free marketplace and free competition. If the seller has directed them that we are not going to make an offer of compensation until there is an offer to be made, then that's the directive from that seller. And that's how that's going to be operated. And I think you are going to find that quite frequently is that is going to be the statement that the seller will look at all things when an offer is made. So let's dive into that a little bit more, realizing that there are brokerage specific things that are going to be specified in that. We are not going to tell you how to operate, but Kathy, that's something that you always got, right? I mean, you said it couldn't be conditional. It was unilateral. And so just give those nuts and bolts of what it was and what it is now not going to be as of July 29th.
Yeah, the offer of compensation was, you said unilateral. That meant it applied to everyone, no matter, and then it was unconditional. So you couldn't put a condition on the offer of compensation like, well, you only get this if you show the property. You only get this if this or that. Well, those requirements are now removed from the MLS. And so it's going to be up to a listing agent, listing brokers, to decide how they're going to, communicate those offers. And then it becomes just like, I know there's some questions, I believe, about the seller concessions. These all become negotiation points. Then then it becomes the puzzle you work to come up with the best scenario for your buyer, and the best scenario for your sellers. And so that offer of compensation just becomes another expense, as it always has been, of the transaction. Just like the title policy, just like the origination fees, things like that do with the mortgage. These are all become part of the expenses, and you can't just automatically assume, because the offer of compensation was, again, meant for everyone, no matter your experience level, no matter how long you've been in business, how long this, or the price of the property. It was always whatever it was is what you were pretty much bound to as the listing broker.
So, and I think something else that was helpful in a vernacular change for me, and it was the Oregon State Association that kind of put out a statement on theirs, was really outlining that now an offer of compensation is an advertisement. And I think that's what we have to look at, just as there could be a seller authorizing you to offer up to $10,000 in seller's contributions to go to the buyer's closing costs. But until that is part of the offer and subsequently ratified and becomes a part of the executed contract, it is just still an advertisement. And so we have to be understanding that that is not unilateral and binding until it makes it into some sort of binding agreement. And I think that's going to be a big shift for people to understand. You can call a listing agent and ask if there's an offer of compensation. However, that is purely still an advertisement that that listing agent has been authorized to share. Until it is ratified in some sort of binding way, it's still just an advertisement. Just like, the refrigerator, just like, closing cost or a flooring allowance or anything else. It has to be materially a part of that transaction at that point. And I think people will start to get in the groove once we can reframe it a little bit on that way. Justin or Kathy, do you have anything additional to add to that?
No, I
okay.
Yeah. Agree.
Okay, let's move. Yeah, there you go. We had Dion who says if the prior MLS listings show a percentage, does that not have to be honored after the changes?
Go ahead, Justin. I got an opinion about that, but
this is a we don't. It depends, and it depends on whether both parties believe it will be honored. So. If the listing's on the MLS right now and it's offering a cooperating compensation on the 29th, that field will disappear, right? Which to me means no, anything that was previously there is gone and would not be offered on that. Is not there's no unilateral offer remains after the 29th, right? Now, if you've put the property under contract prior to the 29th, and prior to the 29th, so it's still pending, it had the offer of compensation, and no other piece of paper has been executed, either a broker-to-broker compensation agreement or an amendment to the residential 1-4 to include compensation. I would have a pretty robust conversation with the other side of the transaction to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and it's probably in your best interest to get a piece of paper executed to ensure that there will not be a breakdown in communication leading to the successful completion of that transaction.
And I would say if this discussion led to a controversy over whether that offer is still good, that controversy would be the subject of a arbitration. And I would defer to an arbitration hearing panel to make that decision of whether that offer of compensation stands, because it may not, because of the rule changes, especially starting Monday, with them being gone, and if there's no agreement already in place in writing that's outside of the offer of compensation in the MLS. Yeah.
Best course of action, Dion, would be if you have anything in limbo right now that is not closing before the 29th, get with your broker and have your broker instruct you as to what they would like you to do, as if there's some sort of additional documentation, the broker-to-broker compensation agreement, as Sherry just chimed in at, whatever they want you to use, of course, but talk to your broker about it, as to what that looks like, because to Kathy's point, you can say, well, it should still be adhered to, but if somebody, and to Justin's point, that's dependent on how the other party feels. Ultimately, it's better to keep everybody accountable with paperwork. And I think that's the best course of action going forward. But of course, talk to your broker as to how they want you to operate.
And as someone who sat in a multitude of arbitration hearings in my career, things that become very important in arbitrations are: did you send an email asking a question? Right? Did you try to seek clarity before we got here? So even if the other party is stubborn about it or unwilling to really have a conversation about it, it's still important that you've reached out and tried to make those connections to try to resolve it and seek clarity in advance of the closing. Because if it were ever to be an arbitrable matter, those steps that you've taken to resolve it in advance would likely be a meaningful part of your packet.
Yeah, and if a hearing panel feels like there was no written agreement, they're not going to hear the case. It's not going to get past the grievance committee. So it's something that you probably need to invest time in now, to make sure, especially if you're working an offer and it hasn't been accepted yet. I would go ahead and get those, as Sherry had said, the broker-to-broker compensation agreement signed, just to be on the safe side.
And even, and to that point, Kathy, it might not be the broker to broker, it might be something
Yeah,
else,
whatever,
but
right? Yeah.
whatever it is, but having it, to your point, was there intentional dialogue around this thing that we are now having a disagreement around? And did you actually ink some sort of binding agreement that supports this? And so I think that's really important. So we had another question. Is there anything wrong with a buyer and agent amending the buyer agent compensation form? So let's talk about that one first, because it's a multiple paragraph. The buyer and agent amending the buyer agent compensation form. So basically, can the buyer representation agreement or a buyer representation agreement as it stands be amended?
Yes.
All contracts can be amended. Yep.
There you go. If the listing agreement specifies no buyer agent commission, we'll say compensation, that's what they meant. Is the listing agreement amendable if buyer agent compensation is negotiated to be paid by co-opting agent or seller?
Sure it is.
Yeah, all agreements can be amended. I think where this question is getting, though, a little bit is, our listing agreements historically have included a commission amount or compensation amount to be paid to the listing broker, and historically some percentage of that listing broker's commission is shared with the buyer broker. In this scenario, a listing contract could only consider compensation to their agent without an offer to the other agent. But in the negotiation of a purchase contract, that can absolutely be negotiated in the purchase contract and may not be reflected elsewhere. And I think that's, there's lots of different ways this could go, because there are four ways an agent gets compensated, right? It could be from a buyer compensates their buyer agent, the listing broker compensates the buyer broker, the seller compensates the buyer broker, or some combination of all three, right? And so I think that is a wrinkle where you could have different agreements all reflecting something that lead to a total that ends up in a final closing statement.
And I would make the statement that the best thing to do, even though it seems like we're just going to be entrenched in more paperwork, and again, let us specify that your brokerage could have their own internal documents, which is absolutely fine. You can use Texas Realtors forms if that's what your brokerage deems that you will do. But whatever agreements, both internal and then a part of the contract, meaning representation agreements and the contract itself, there is a way to amend them and to make them match so that as things change, you can use amendments to create a continuity. As Sherry nicely and eloquently put, amend to reflect final agreement and contract. And that's really the best course, because to Kathy's point, the panel is going to want to know, like, what did you do? What did you do to try to get these things, to match and to get clarity and understanding of all parties and all of those things? So the best thing is to amend to reflect the final agreement and contract. And I think more so what Mark was trying to get to is, because I've also had these conversations with him. You can't amend, you can't amend these things, and so it doesn't have to be so rigid in the thought process of what the original representation agreement outlined, whether it's in a buyer representation agreement or a listing agreement, that can be changed depending on what the final agreement says. And then the last part of that, which I have heard from a lot of people, is title companies. Will title companies be required to obtain these? And we're not a title company. They are not a party to the contract, is my party line as far as that's concerned, but we'll need the appropriate documentation to be able to reflect what the compensation will read on the final closing disclosure. What is the feedback from you guys?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the title company is going to have to know who to pay and how much. So they're going to need to have some documentation that supports that. and I think that may vary title company to title company, and you and your brokerage will have to work with those title companies and those title professionals to understand where that relationship is most comfortable for you and your clients. I mean, I don't think there's a 100% answer on exactly how each title company or frankly lender will have an expectation for what documentation they're going to need, because the underwriters are also going to be asking for things and they want to understand the paper trail, and that's going to vary again lender to lender. So like everybody's kind of having to learn a new way of doing business, and to sit here and say there won't be a little bit of painful email chains and text chains and phone calls back and forth to try to get these things across the closing table over the next 6 months. Like, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have some longer email chains than normal as we try to work through this. But I think the guiding light in all of this, all these questions about, well, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? What do I have to change here to make this? And the answer is, what piece of paper do you need to execute to give your client the clearest picture about what's happening in the transaction, and making it clear that the services you're providing and the compensation that they're giving you is clearly outlined and per Article 9 of the Code of Ethics, right? All agreements must be clear and understandable and in writing. And if we're doing that effectively, then I think you're going to answer your own questions. Like, well, can I modify this? Yeah, as long as it's clear to your client what's happening and that they understand what they're paying for and they're comfortable with it, and you've had the conversation, you've documented it, you're in great shape. Your customer is your guiding light.
I will tell you this. I'm really tired of Sherry Fearbacher getting you kudos because I don't know that I get this many. Right, Kathy? Geez. But to Sherry's point, clear and transparent, which was the crux of the lawsuit. The merit of the lawsuit was that there needs, beyond other things that we shall not speak of, but it's clarity and transparency for the consumer, and an understanding of who's getting paid for what and when and how, and those are the things. Now, does that mean that we're not making that things aren't going to be a little bit more difficult, that you're not going to be spending more time in administrative paperwork? Of course, but it's to make sure that thanks, Mom. But it's to make sure that the consumer knows what's going on. And this is actually a good thing to make us slow down for just a second and take more time to spend on those consultation portions of setting up expectations of not only how we're going to work together, but how even the facilitation of paperwork is going to look, what the expectation is of both parties, how this is going to work, how you get paid as whether you're a listing agent or a buyer's agent, all of those things. And it's slowing us down to take a deep breath and to increase that dialogue with the consumer. And that's a good thing.
And can I add one thing about that, Ashley? I strongly believe that, we're a consumer-driven economy. You have buyers and sellers who are using the courts to voice their opinion about this situation. It's an unfortunate outcome that this has occurred in the manner in which it occurred. Okay. But it is the consumer, these lawsuits and these settlements and these decisions by these jury, is the voice of the consumer saying, we need for y'all to explain this to us better. We need to understand how you work. And this is the only way that we're going to be happy. We're going to be comfortable with this compensation situation because we don't understand it. And we're saying we want to understand, and we want to be part of the conversation that they feel they have been left out of. I'm not saying it's true, and I don't feel like our policies have ever been wrong, but it's the voice of these lawsuits and these jury verdict is the voice of the consumer. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're talking to your buyers and sellers, and making sure that they have a complete understanding and transparency about, how you're getting paid, how they're, what you're doing for them at the end of the day, and making sure that their interests come first. And then yours will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have 10 minutes left. We always go through these so fast because we have great comments in the chat, and then the dialogue continues on. Let's just talk about things for a little bit, and as we leave our guests tonight. And I think some of it is maybe reframing a mindset, which you just very eloquently talked about, Kathy, about why this came about. And I think if we can shift the prism, or create a better filter where you can put these questions in, and then your internal processor is working to help navigate and answer. I would say from my side is bracket it out. If you have a question, kind of put it under the context of, is this help create a better transparent situation and allow me to advocate on behalf of my client? Or is it not? And if you go, I don't know if it is, I don't know if this aids a transparent picture for my client and help me do a better job on their behalf, then maybe you just err on the side of caution and say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And I think right now we're so focused on our business practice that we're not thinking about how this impacts our advocacy with the consumer. And that's what I keep on going back to. Like, the consumer still needs us. They didn't know what the old forms really said or understood. And we're putting so much emphasis on what an old form looks like versus a new form, depending on if you use the Texas Realtors forms or not. And ultimately, your client didn't know. But this is gut checking you to have a better, probative, more clear and transparent conversation with your client at the time of presenting these agreements to have them signed. And like I said, yeah, I hate paperwork. You can ask my mother. I hate paper. I hate it all. But it's a good thing to make me slow down and make sure I'm really having those great consultations and defining those clear expectations with my clients, because that means they're going to have a better experience when it's all said and done, which results in more business for me because I took really good care of them. So that's kind of what I say on that. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the old adage that like every realtor should sell their own property or go through a real estate transaction themselves every 5 years or something like that, just to remember what it's like.
Yeah.
Your clients sell a house or buy a house somewhere between, I think it's actually gotten longer now. I think it's like 7 to 10 years instead of like 5 to 7 to 10 years between transactions. You all do 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 transactions a year, depending on your business. You're comfortable in these spaces. They happen regularly. These conversations are automatic for you. Even Kathy today was sharing a real estate transaction that she had in her family where it was almost like an assumption that Kathy, because she works in the business, really understood a real estate transaction. Kathy does not do real estate transactions every day. Right? She just helps you guys do real estate transactions, a totally different lens. And so we have to remember in the industry that our customers do not have near the context that we assume they do. So many of the fear and anxieties I've heard you guys express are you putting your own lens onto your client about what you think your client is going to say or what you think your client is going to perceive. And I think what your clients are looking for is a professional to help them complete the most complicated transaction that they're likely to go through in the next 5 to 10 years. And they want to have a clear understanding of what services you're going to provide and what they're going to pay you. That's not to say there are not going to be some clients and customers that don't want to do that, right? In the same way that on the listing side, there have been clients and customers that have chosen not to use a full service agent or a FSBOD. Yes, those clients will exist, but we really need to focus on the fact that they need your services. You are professionals that will provide them. You're a fiduciary under the law, which there are not very many of those, and you're worth every penny they will agree to pay you. And if we focus on those things, we're gonna continue to kick butt.
Yeah, and we got Jenny Harrelson coming in with some stuff too. She said, "Don't shy away from letting your buyers know the value of the services you bring to the real estate transaction." And that's the whole point. Like, guys, this is the opportunity. This is the part where education and training and increasing your professionalism and your value proposition. You might be kicking butt in several areas, but you realize through all of this, it's exposed maybe a weakness in your arsenal. That's okay. if you're having anxiety over part of the operational change, that might just be something that you need a little bit more help and training with. Like, constantly learning keeps us all really sharp. And that's why I think from the association side, it's been so encouraging to have the brokerage community kind of reinvigorate us from the standpoint of coming into their doors and doing brokerage specific trainings and help them and assist them with making sure that their agents are well informed and having different educational opportunities at the association. I think through all of this, that is a really exciting proposition that has come from it, is that agents not only want to learn, some of them have to learn again how to operate through a transaction and through their business style. And I think that's going to better all of us. The cooperating agent on the other side, because now I'm getting a more well-informed and more professional, teammate in a transaction, our community all together. And so, as much as we focus on the negative portion of it, guys, we've been saying for a long time, a raising the bar would be a really great thing. And this is forcing us to raise that bar. And so that's exciting from that side. So Kathy, it's your department that's going to be fielding the calls though, come July 29th and there for probably quite some time afterwards. What are you guys going to be doing to show some grace and some healthy, constructive encouragement back to the agents as they're still trying to navigate these issues?
Well, I think my team understands that this is a huge shift in how they're doing business, and they understand that. So it's creating anxiety. So my team's going to do their best to be patient, listen. We have resources that we can email to people who contact us and need to talk. We are going to be really careful, though, that we are not advising agents because we want them to talk to their brokers. And because the brokers are going to be leading these practice changes. There's only so far we can take this, and then the brokers are going to have to take it over the goal line. We can't tell you how to fill out the form. We can't tell you what forms to use. We can tell you what's allowed in them, what's not allowed in the MLS, what is allowed in the MLS. We can answer some baseline questions, but ultimately we're gonna have you talk to your broker. And if a broker calls me, I'm going to do the best to answer questions. I had a great manager that I've known for a long time call and ask me a question about something specific. And I said, I'm going to read the rule to you. And then I'm going to ask you to call the Texas Realtors Legal Hotline. I'm going to ask you to talk to your broker because it was a manager. And I'm going to ask you to talk to your own legal counsel. I'm going to give you tools, enough tools, hopefully, that you can answer your own question. But we have to be really careful too about how we're answering questions. And that kind of leads me to another area that, be careful who you're listening to. We're getting feedback from, people who say, oh, I read this, or I went to a presentation about that. And I'm like, oh my Lord. So be really careful who you hear, who you're listening to. Your broker should be the first person you're listening to. If you're not the broker, then understand that, me and Justin, Ashley, Johnny Moat, who's also on here. We're very involved in this process. We know what the rules say. We may have been part of the arm at NAR who approved some of these policies or looked at the language of these policies. We're very close to this situation. And so just be really careful. I mean, there was a question, and this is the second time it's been brought up, that there's no connection between these practice changes and the clear cooperation policy. They're not related whatsoever. Clear cooperation is still intact. The policy has not changed, and it has no effect on clear cooperation. So, but I've heard that rhetoric a couple of times, and it's just not true. And so just be really careful and understand that your broker is going to be the first person that you need to speak to. And I know that we're going to get questions, people who didn't know, realize it. And there's probably going to be some confusion about why now we don't have to do this till August 17th. Well, we need to get ahead of this and make sure that before August 17th, you're already in compliance, that this is no big deal come August 17th when everything goes into effect. So, so that's my 2 cents on all this.
Hey, Dave. Well, I just want to let you know you can actually go on mymetrotex.com and look at our course and events. I think there are 2 online classes on Monday, Zoom classes. that you can take on just strictly the update to the Texas Realtors Forum. So check back in on that. Our in-person ones have been going round and round over the last several weeks, and we're so appreciative of our staff and our trainers that have been on top of this. And I know that's what I'm so proud of, that we've got an amazing director of MLS and Kathy and Justin at the helm as CEO of MetroTex, making sure that we are driving that home, that we are a member service organization, and we are here to serve our members, the good, the bad, and the ugly things that are happening in our industry, but we're here to support you. So Justin, any last statement that you want to leave with our guests?
I would just say, and I think Johnny said it great in the chat, this is a change for the industry, but change brings opportunity. It brings excitement. We can be frustrated and disappointed with maybe how we got here, but it's time to sort of embrace where we are and use this as a springboard forward. You're going to get real tired of me, Kathy, Ashley, and others at the MetroTex world of saying, this is an opportunity to really focus on our brokerages. This is an opportunity for you to really build your relationship with your broker, lean on your broker. They are the ones that are going to be responsible for this within each of our member companies. I mean, we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to support that relationship between the agent and the broker. So thanks to everybody for being here. And I think this is a big part of it, right? Just continuing to talk about the issues in front of us.
And I believe that we're going to drop into the chat a resource that we've created from our website that has to do with the changes, the timelines, links to and it's just been dropped there. It's the timeline for implementing NAR practice changes. It's got links to the Texas Realtors forums. It's got a link to our education offerings. It's got the timelines, the discussion about the buyer agreement and what's required in the buyer agreement. So, a lot of things that you need are going to be right there on that page. So, and we'll be keeping that up to date if anything else changes.
And the last thing I'm going to sign off with is the thing I can tell you the most is, guys, let's have some patience and some grace and not always assume that somebody is trying to be nefarious on the other side. There is going to be a learning curve. And ultimately, it's the best situation for our clients to advocate on their behalf and try to be cooperative in our communication and with those other agents. And so I just implore you to take a deep breath, show some patience and grace, and don't always first assume that people are trying to do anything to deceive. It could just be an education issue. And that's what we're going to be here to help support you along the way. So thank you, everyone. Justin, go have fun at your son's basketball game. Kathy, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you guys next